If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Lore by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, I shall rank the main guilds in Wraith the Oblivion in what I consider to be the best and worst across all editions. As much pull and influence the legions and the hierarchy of Stygia have in the underworld, there is no denying the power of the guild matches and, in some cases, exceeds anything the Deathlord's legions collectively possess. The guild's understanding and appreciation of the various arcani has given the citizens of the Dark Kingdom of Iron and beyond many reasons to fear, hate, and respect the 16 ghostly factions. But you're not here because you want to know what the general populace thinks about the guilds. If you were, you could check out the lore episodes I've done on the guilds. You are here because you want to hear the opinions of your lore and saviour, which is subjectively the definitive ranking of the guilds in Wraith the Oblivion. Lucky for you, I intend to supply just that. Before we begin, I have to say that all thoughts and opinions are my own, so if you disagree with something I have said, that is totally fine. It does not mean that you are right and I'm wrong and vice versa. Number 16. The Usurers Guild. The Usurers were among the most respected of the guilds whose talents had them up there with the Artificers and Maskers. With the Usuri Arcanos, they can convert Paphos into Corpus and vice versa. With great power comes great responsibility, and that is something the guild lacks terribly. Something that is also missing is their history, which Onyx Path would address in Wraith the Oblivion 20th Anniversary Edition, which would also play into the guild's secretive nature, but one I find to be quite lazy. Sure, the destruction of the records and archive and their covert manner of induction can lead to many plot points and intrigue in of themselves, but things are just a little too vague for my liking, and I would have loved to have learned more about them in 20th Anniversary Edition. The lack of lore and world building regarding the guilds is a big problem across the entire game line, but the Usurers are criminally short on such juicy info. I rate this guild money, 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 money out of 10. Number 15. The Alchemists Guild. Once members of the Artificers Guild and now sub-bottoms, the Alchemists work with inanimate objects and the energies they provide, with some even being able to make relics out of their creations and / or automatons with the Arcanos Flux. They are a guild I would really like, as they have really gone through the wars throughout their existence, purely out of jealousy and spite out of their parent guild and their possible alliance with the hierarchy during the revolt of the guilds. I honestly find them quite pathetic. There isn't a single guild I don't like, but I find they're responsive towards their ostracizing, or rather, the little we know of it, to leave a very bland taste in my mouth. I rate this guild surprise mechanics out of 10. Number 14. The Proctors Guild. Another criminal guild with soddle going on. The Proctors are practitioners of embody. If you have seen a wraith in the world of darkness without the aid of necromancy, chances are it is one of those spoopy boys appearing before your very eyes. Curiously allied with the hierarchy, despite their status, the fact these wraiths practice their power to know what it's like to feel again is very goth romantic, and I love that. Besides this, there's very little about the guild that appeals to me, just a very guild across the board. It would have been interesting to see a loud portion of the guild play up and have it documented, tarnishing the guild's reputation, rather than Charon coming and saying, embody bad, guild bad. I rate this guild, now you see me, now you don't, out of 10. Number 13. The Monitors Guild. Sometimes called the Seven Families after its shadowy administration, the Monitors are an interesting guild who in turn turn their very important, trustworthy task of monitoring fetters and becoming a criminal enterprise, screwing over everyone and thing they can. They quest for power, and what better way for them to control pretty much everyone they meet than by abusing their lifeweb Arcanos. There are few guilds in the Stygian Empire that are objectively shitty wraiths, and the Monitors are shining beacons of how to be a cunt, though they only serve in grace as attack attacking the nobles first, so thank you Onyx Path for that little update in their lore. The problem I have with the monitors is that their criminal doings is all that they do. All of the lore, and scarce as it is of the official material, is all revolving around their criminal doings. It's a little one note which doesn't make them all that interesting once you have the basics down. Because that is all there is. The only reason this guild is higher on the list than the previous 4 is that there's actually something to work with beyond money and cowardice. I rate this guild Eat the Rich out of 10. Number 12, the Chantours Guild. Primarily known as entertainers, the Chantours bring music wherever they go. Literally, their keening Arcanos projects their arts, usually in song form far and wide, making them welcome in pretty much any Stygian stronghold. All these minstrels do their thing. Toreador players feel right at home here, as these ghosts are arrogant pricks, seeing themselves as the truest and most accepted artisans in the underworld. I want to say that isn't their whole guild, but it really is. The formation of the guild is built upon the squabbling of 2 factions within the guild, who thought their way was the best way to lead the guild, as well as sad views bringing them enemies plenty amongst the other guilds and the hierarchy. To an extent. Whilst arguably being another one-note guild, pun very much intended, the twist of their outlook on their craft and free spirits makes them a little more interesting, rather than literal free spirits that have stories to share. As someone who's had first-hand experience in the music circles with snobs across classical, jazz and metal genres, it was a welcome yet annoying surprise to learn of these viewpoints. I rate this guild. There once was a ship that put to sea. The name of the ship was the Billy of Tea. The winds blew up, her bow dipped down. A blow, my bully bows blow. Soon may the wellerman come to bring us sugar and tea and rum. One day the turning is done, we'll take our leave and go. Out of 10. Number 11, the Oracles Guild. Collectors of tarot cards, pin back your ears, because I got just the guild for you. The Oracles read the web of fate to read your past, present, and future with their feared Fatalism Arcanos. They are some of the oldest guild wraiths, and Fatalism isn't that far off in terms of age either, regardless of what you feel about the Artificers. Usually, soothsayers and fortune readers don't do much for me in stories. They are terribly convenient ways of info dumping, lazily one might add. These sorts of characters or factions tend to fall into one of 2 camps, crazy cryptics or vague know-it-alls. Both it and the legion it is associated to break this mold slightly, as the oracles know exactly what is happening and help to shape the future of Stygia, much to the best of their ability. If you use the original metaplot, where the event of the 6th Great Maelstrom occurred, they technically got it wrong, thanks to Charon's stupidity. Spoilers aside, they are an interesting guild to me, with a lot more structure than one might imagine with a group like this. Their headquarters is also riddled with many narrative opportunities, especially if you admire Greek mythology. Those who know, though, if you don't, check out the episode of the guild to know what I mean. I rate this guild the Fall Arcana out of 10. Number 10. The Puppeteers Guild. In many ways, the Puppeteers are very similar to the Proctors. They both share a gothic romanticism akin to many old classic horror films, only instead of materialization, they wish to skin ride with their puppetry Arcanos, literally feeling as they once did, or at least something very similar to that. They are also terribly disorganized, which is kinda to be expected. The Puppeteers stand out in a few ways, mainly with their association and aid in the Risen and Renegades, putting a unique catch on the guilds that are either very much by themselves or have the hierarchy at arm's reach. Of course, such damnation comes with their practices and their estranged leadership, something I feel some of the earlier guilds on this list could have benefited from to make their lore and plots a little bit more interesting. And that is why this guild is as high as they are but not any lower. Much of the same one-notedness is found here that doesn't capture my interest as I would like it to, as you could get really creepy with the guild if there was a bit more variety within the guild that encouraged this for the new player. I rate this guild, I'm a real boy, out of 10. Number 9. The Sandman Guild. Dreamers and charlatans don't do much for me usually, but the Sandmen really fascinate me. Like the Chantours, they are performers and entertainers, welcome pretty much wherever they go. Unlike the Chantours, their Arkonos is Phantasm, which allows the Sandman to affect dreams and those who subconsciously weave them as they sleep. The Sandmen also see themselves as expressional free spirits, much like the Chantours they are often paired with. The similarities end here, as the Sandmen are very oddly structured. And what I mean is that there is a lot of structure, too much I dare say, as well as plenty of factions for the individual guild wraith to fine-tune their experience, study, and practice, each one more interesting than the last. Something I find peculiar but very much appreciated is that the Sandmen canonically fill different roles in different Dark Kingdoms to better fit the culture they are suited in. Of course, said functions are based on the hit-and-miss write-ups of White Wolf of the 90s, but attempts to diversify one of the 16 guilds by geographical placement is a pleasant and welcome change that makes them stand out a bit more than most. I rate this guild the two songs you're immediately thinking of when I say Sandmen out of 10. Number 8. The Mori Guild. When you learn how to pronounce the name of this bastard guild and their forbidden memory-altering power of mnemosynis, you will never forget. Not even the guild could take that away from you. Probably. Poor jokey segues aside, the true nature of this guild is one that is indeed very noble in comic book fashion, sacrificing themselves to the great good of the people, who of which will ostracize them forever due to the lies of Charon for the sole purposes of saving himself. Stygia too, of course, but it is very clear that Charon is more a self-preservationist, not really worthy of anyone who follows and supports the twat. But regarding the guild, the secretive nature and the fragments of the proud culture that drip into the modern structure are sad to unpack and fascinating to mull over, especially with their relation to the rest of the guilds. They are similar to the Pardoners in that they have a sacred duty to perform, one that the others won't understand, for better and for worse. Naturally perfect antagonists for a chronicle, it is very easy to mould them as the unsung, misunderstood hero that may be lying about the involvement of Charon, or are they? I rate this guild forget-me-nots out of 10. Number 7. The Pardoners Guild. Without this guild, much of Stygia would fall apart, as the Pardoners are the practitioners of the Castigate Arkonos, which subdues and tames the shadow, albeit a temporary amount of time. Of course, they are going to be one of the great guilds. There is plenty to admire about this guild. There is no arrogance or pride with what they do. They have a job to fill, and it's their duty to perform. They have moulded the guild very much to their liking, using different names for the different positions relating to the Catholic Church, something that I loathe and love simultaneously. It is also cool that you don't have to be a devoted Christian with a confessional to beat the shadow into submission, but a simple barkeep works as a concept. There is plenty of strange and unique flexibility with the guild, which is why they are so high up on this list. If it was only doctors and vicars, then they would be much, much lower. I rate this guild, forgive me daddy, I mean father, I have sinned, out of 10. Number 6. The Artificers Guild. With the spirit side of Stygian society sorted, we just need the infrastructure now, which is where our friends in the Artificers Guild enter the chat, along with all that Stygian steel they made through the Soul Forges. Oddly, their Arkonos inhabit makes very little impact on the guild's history, other than it definitely being more useful than Flux. They have a lot going for them that on the surface looks a bit bland, part workers' union, part cult, but you dig a little more, and there is a bit more variety to be found, if you're willing to ignore all the shouting of, "We are the oldest and best guild." Of course, it is the cult aspects of the guild that get me the most, mainly the almost spiritual relationship with the Soul Forges, the totally horrifying callousness of it, one that requires total divorce of emotion to do what needs to be done for Stygia. In fact, there is an honour in their work, for the most part, which makes the Artificers absolutely terrifying, even more so than the small portion of the guild that get a kick out of what they do, in my totally biased opinion. I rate this guild Bob the Builder. Can we fix it? Bob the Builder. Yes, we can, out of 10. Number 5. The Spooks Guild. No guild surprised me as much as the Spooks did upon first reading their lore in their guild book. Much of the core books present them as thugs at a mafia level, all buddy-buddy with the Haunters Guild with their outrage arcanas that can push and manipulate objects across the shroud. Oh, and they're fucking hench! It doesn't sound very impressive, but then you open the guild book and suddenly they have some semblance of structure, morals, and a whole ass underdog story done right. Sure, many are criminals that will beat the living shit out of you, but there is a strange sense of vigilante honour, standing up for those who can't, protecting the family, and so forth. Whilst I won't say they are good protagonists, they are certainly at the bottom of the dickhead chart when it comes to the maidenless behaviour of the guilds. I rate this guild various mafia stereotypes and quotes out of 10. Number 4. The Masquerades Guild. Part assassin, part perfectionist, and part body sculptor, the Masquerades Guild are terrifying at a glance, as the Moliate Arcanus allows them to sculpt the corpus of themselves and others. It is very easy to compare them to the Tzimisce of Vampire the Masquerade, or the Vulgaire, the secret lineage of Toreador Anti-Tribu, especially when all three look beyond the mortal constraints and understanding of beauty. To narrow them down to just those two ideas is doing the guild a huge disservice, especially when both of these vampiric clans tend to have a very narrow pool of sort of character. The Masquers are not interested in the beauty of themselves or their clients. Beauty is an emotion, a human feeling, and the Masquers are above this. Beyond the blunt application of their talents and diversity and accessibility for players, it is the philosophy they have for their powers that really makes them stand out. I rate this guild trans rights are human rights out of 10. Number 3. The Solicitors Guild. We're in the top 3 and I bet you're as pumped as I am. If not, I could probably change that if I had intimation, the presence of the underworld, but much better. This Arcanos is practiced by the Solicitors Guild, who are probably the most sinister out of the guilds, purely because of their powers to influence the emotions of those around them, perfecting the art of gaslighting in the process. There isn't a lot of information about this guild, and what is known was pretty much altered in 20th Anniversary Edition to make them a little less confusing. With previous guilds in this list, it's the lack of information that has made them disappointing for me, but it is the inverse that makes them so engaging for me here, particularly with their power and the relationship they have with it. There is no telling how much power they wield given the subtle nature of their Arcanos. It forces the readers to force fear onto them because we don't know what they're up to and just what they manipulate. Their small size makes sense when you consider this. I rate this guild green with envy out of 10. Number 2. The Harbingers Guild. The choice for second best guild may puzzle those when compared to the other ones so high up on this list. The Harbingers is deliberately vague and incomplete, with all that defines them is their duty-bound wanderlust to rescue those lost in the Tempest via their Argos Arcanos, as they can sprout wings and let the violent storms carry them away. Besides the simple charm of me always wanting wings to fly, why are they number 2 on this list? For me, there was something very noble and touching about their motives, as well as the 20th Anniversary Edition update that ties in some maritime structure to them and how guild masters of the guild are the reason why there are any necropoli at all. They were really the only guild that didn't really partake in the revolt of the guild as a whole unit, which makes a pleasant change of pace. It is difficult for me to justify my love of this guild, as a lot of it is sentimental that just resonates with me a lot. I think they're pretty cool that they're just unsung heroes of the underworld. I rate this guild Red Bull gives you wings out of 10. Number 1. The Haunters Guild. Besides the fact they are dripping in moody goth vibes that makes me feel things, the Haunters Guild are dripping in lore that connects them and their Pandemonium Arcanos to Werewolf the Apocalypse and Changeling the Dreaming, but more so the former. Their power allows them to ignite small pockets of chaos, essentially by manipulating the energies of the Shroud itself, in an attempt to weaken it to the point prior to the Sundering. They, much like the power, are a nuanced and subtle lot and not as raving mad as the books imply them to be, which is very much a relief. Saying the mentioning of that made me worry about Fishmack vibes, but there really isn't any of that here. In fact, there really isn't any indication of their madness from their writings, just their goals, one could argue. Introspective and passionate, there is little to dislike with this disorganized bunch of goths. I rate this guild Obscurity with layers out of 10. And that, as they say, is that. 16 groups of ghostly guys, gals, and non-binary pals, ranked from worst to best in what I believe is the ultimate definitive list. That said, this was really tough to do, as I do like most of the guilds, and trying to work out where they sat in this list was a nightmare, as many could swap about a place or two depending on mood and day. For example, the first and second ones actually did swap around tonight. Regardless, I do hope this was engaging for you, or at the very least, somewhat interesting, and I would be very curious to know what is your favourite guild in the comments section below. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we will upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.